Thanks for being here tonight. I hope we're a little bigger crowd, but it's an enthusiastic crowd. It's a loud crowd. That's good too. We're going to start off by acknowledging the dignitaries who are here. I see the mayor is toward the back of the room. Thank you. I was told the vice mayor and the planning commission chair were on their way. We'll see if they show up, hopefully so. I think that's it for city dignitaries. For years, I always forgot Belinda Fisher. John is now the designated Belinda Fisher. He's the guy I was talking to just before I walked up here. What can I tell you? John, I apologize. I'll try to do better next time. Who else am I missing?
No, our committee and commission members, we don't have good volunteers on all our committees and commissions. We don't have good city government, so recognize the committee members.
Tree committee member there, Bill Cover. I chair the transit committee. Ann is on the climate action commission. Is there somebody I'm missing? Okay. What's that? Oh, that's right.
No, I'm not.
You served many years on PBAC though. Thank you for that. Mentioning KB people without whom this couldn't happen. Sharon Kirk. I have a story I have to tell you later. Sharon Kirk is the co-chair of Know Before You Grow. Dan Lake is the other co-chair with whom we've always said we couldn't do these things. Tonight, we're proving him wrong. He's not here. And Colin Thomas, who is here someplace, but right there, is taking his place and doing a great job. So, with all that, a lot of other folks in the room are very helpful, and everything you do is appreciated. Most of you probably already know our upcoming calendar, but I've got a few things I can surprise you with this evening. 2 weeks from now, this space, I'm really looking forward to this. Tony Jordan is the founder and president of a group nonprofit called Parking Reform Network, pushing for reduced elimination of parking minimums, better parking management nationwide. I got to know Tony because I reached out to Donald Shoup, who said, you need to talk to Tony about talking to Petaluma, which is seriously cool. So Tony has agreed to appear. He's not going to be here in person. He will be on video. Nonetheless, I think you'll enjoy him a lot. I've had a chance to talk to him a couple of times. He's a good guy and has good things to say. September 13th, for some reason, we can't seem to get the speaker to give us final confirmation. I'm sure he's going to, but until then, I won't mention his name, but I will say he's going to talk about SB 9. He's an attorney with familiarity. I know, I just went through the acronyms there and I shouldn't do that. SB 9, Senate Bill 9. It's the state bill that allows people to split lots automatically with no city approval and then put a new home on the second lot and ADUs on both. So on the right size lot, you can turn one lot into 4 with virtually no approvals from City Hall except building permits, which is pretty seriously cool. It's not fully implemented. The city should be writing some rules to implement SB 9 locally, but it's a step in the right direction. And the speaker, who I won't name, can illuminate for us where it's going. Jumping to October, another one I'm really excited about. When I was in Charlotte recently for the Strong Towns Conference, I had a chance to listen to an architect from Arkansas talk about designing traditional looking homes on very small lots, tied back to SB 9. She's agreed to talk to us via video. Whether it'll be the 11th or the 25th, I don't know, but I've got a placemaking consultant who I really like, even more than the architect, who is supposed to tell me 11th to 25th, and when she picks, the other one will fall into place, and October will be just a great month. I skipped over the end of September because I think most of you already know this. We're doing the first ever Better Cities Film Festival in Petaluma, 90-minute reel of selected short movies. on all forms of urbanism, from parking to transportation, active transportation, transit, housing, all sorts of stuff. Barry, Sharon, I, others have been vetting the film, deciding which the best 90 minutes are. And I like it. I'm looking forward to showing it off. September 20th, we're going to be at the Boulevard Cinemas. And on September 28th, we're going to be at SRJC Petaluma. Tickets are, I think, available online for sale right now. If you call yourself an urbanist advocate, they're $7.50. So we have 400 seats to fill. Please come and bring friends. With that, the speaker tonight is Chris Larson, 15-year resident. He has done a number of ADUs. He's looking for more opportunities. And Chris, the floor is yours. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you very much. Really excited to be sharing and talking to everyone here. I'm going to start this off by saying I am not a professional, I'm not an expert, I'm a practitioner. I'm not part of any planning priesthood, architect priesthood, lawyer priesthood, any of that kind of stuff. But I'm somebody that's done some projects around town and have generated some observations around what works and kind of what I've just seen other people doing in town. Really around this idea of gentle density. So this idea of how can we increase density in existing neighborhoods in Petaluma. So this is not about land use fights or tract home developments or any of that. It's about what can we do in our existing neighborhoods to increase density, which then has a host of other benefits. I care about this particularly around climate, I care about it around social equity, I care about it around walkable neighborhoods, having neighborhood commercial and the density to support that. So those are my motivations. I also think it's a really rewarding thing to invest in. Time, money, that sort of thing. It feels much more tangible to me than investing in the S&P 500 or something like that. So those are my motivations and cards on the table. And with that, maybe we can jump into some thoughts on this. So next slide. So this is what I want to talk about today, and I'm totally open to people jumping in with comments, questions, exclamations along the way. And I'd like to have a little bit of a discussion at the end. So I want to talk about ADU and SB9. I'll define what those are. I don't want to steal the anonymous September 13th presenter's thunder, so I won't go into too much detail. And then I want to talk about what these are doing in Petaluma, where projects work in Petaluma, what they look like, and then maybe how we could accelerate some of these ideas. Next. Okay, this is the most text-heavy slide in the whole thing. And I'm happy to share this, and that's why there's links throughout it so people can click on this later. But essentially, these two laws sort of I consider to be kind of sisters. ADU is the bigger sister. It's been around. Really, ADU kicked off roughly in 2016 when the state started liberalizing various elements of the ability to create and construct accessory dwelling units on single-family and multifamily, and even now mixed use and commercial properties. An ADU is essentially colloquially known as a granny unit. Cities have to allow them up to 800 square feet. Cities can go up to 1,200 square feet. Petaluma's not quite there yet, maybe we'll get there. No parking requirements, impact fees waived on small ones. It doesn't impact density calculations, so there's a lot of flexibility to this. They are allowed in historic districts, and then really significantly for the east side, they override CC&Rs. So a lot of the east side neighborhoods have covenants, codes, and restrictions that explicitly limited all number of uses on those properties, and that was overridden in a bill. Yes? So
we're in the third line down, is that must be a 4-foot setback or greater than 4 foot? What's the...
Sorry, that might be a typo. So the setbacks, the city cannot have imposed setbacks greater than 4 feet.
Okay.
And that is a huge driver of feasibility of these projects, particularly when you think about a lot of our R1, R2, R3 zoning districts have 20-foot or 15-foot rear yard setbacks, which really chews up a lot of available space for these projects. Okay, so SB9 is the new kid on the block. This is a bill that was passed with great controversy last year. Took a lot of punches in the legislature, got watered down in some pretty key ways along the way. But I think the theory that a lot of people have is that what we've seen with ADUs, to start small and build incrementally on these laws. And so a lot of people expect that to happen with SB9. And when SB9 came out, and we'll talk about what it is in a second, all sorts of cities, particularly affluent cities in the South Bay, came up with all these crazy excuses about why we couldn't do this. And the city of Woodside claimed the whole city was mountain lion habitat and you could build second houses. And Los Altos said you had to plant, $10,000 trees to block these unsightly things, or whatever. So that stuff will get cleaned up over time as the legislature sees, oh, this isn't so scary, let's do a little bit more of it and get bigger with it. SB9, one key thing that a lot of people don't know is it's only single-family zoning, so only in R1 and R2, which there isn't really that much of in Petaluma. Most of it is on the east side, where for a variety of reasons, these projects have been slower to take off, and so that's a big issue. SB9, as Dave mentioned, does two things. It allows you to split a lot ministerially, so the city can't impose public dedications, can't make you plant street trees, can't make you dedicate open space, blah, blah, blah. And you can build up to 2 primary units on one lot or the resulting 2 lots. The lots, basically the resulting lots can have 2 primary units, 1 primary or an ADU, but if there's no split, you can use SB9 to create 2 primary houses and 1 ADU, so 3 on a single parcel. Same kind of rules around like guidelines, setbacks, and that sort of a thing. A little bit tighter. These can be denied on health and safety findings, so like fire emergency egress, things like that. Can't be done on environmentally sensitive sites, historic zones, all Quest Criollo earthquake zones, things of that sort. There's also a lot of anti-displacement measures that were put in place, so we can't do this on properties that have been subject to Ellis Act evictions or things like that. Commonalities that make these things successful, there's ministerial approval, 60-day clock to approve these, so basically building permit only. No design review, no conditions of approval, no requirements for public improvements and dedications. Okay, I read the whole slide, sorry. Let's go to the next one. So this is my take on what's going on with the lots. So the way that the state is a huge disconnect between rhetoric and action, right? With Newsom saying, oh, we gotta build 3 million houses, and we're building like 30 to 50,000 houses a year in the state. That's kind of a huge disconnect. This has been one of the places where the legislature has gotten comfortable reforming a little bit and taking these incremental steps. It works with preemption. The state says this is how you're doing it. Cities, you have no say in this. That's sort of an interesting political dynamic we can talk about over beer sometime. Don't touch CEQA, right? None of this stuff, it all skirts around CEQA to some degree. It doesn't affect CEQA, which is increasingly being used as a tool between labor unions and so forth. The reforms start small, they build incrementally. They start off with a lot of protections around owner occupancy. They're trying to make it so greedy developers can't use these and overrun neighborhoods, that sort of a thing. And there's a lot of interesting stuff going around parking minimums and transit proximity, where you get some additional goodies around either density or reduced parking requirements. I won't read all of this, but basically what's going on is the law gets passed, and then there's lots of incremental improvements in each subsequent legislative session that are very, very small ball, very incremental, but they're very much addressed to making the projects more viable and really improving their project economics. So like reducing requirements for fire sprinklers. Like that sounds trivial, but it actually has a big impact on the viability of these projects, right? The things of that sort. So that's kind of where this is going. I think SB9 will follow in the same path. Fun fact, ADU law has been tweaked 17 times since this kind of revolution started. It'd be nice if SB9 progressed a little bit faster than that. Let's go next. But the upshot of all this is pretty cool. So ADUs represent 20% of California's housing starts now in 7 years. So this pie chart from 2013, this is from 2022, the blue wedge, almost non-existent at the top, is a pretty big chunk of new housing. Sonoma County is actually a leader, so this is ADU permits essentially per capita. Northern California, us, Humboldt, and tiny Alpine County are in the lead. And that's really exciting, but the real action is really happening down in Los Angeles, where tens of thousands of these things are being permitted annually. Affordability is really interesting. So like public agencies in San Francisco and Oakland are paying up to $1 million per affordable housing unit. There's massive public process and fights around these projects, or extracting in-loop fees from developers and stuff. ADUs are much cheaper than that and are kind of naturally affordable in some senses. And so I think that's an intriguing dimension of this that maybe gets overlooked. Let's go next.
Great.
Yes, sorry.
2 questions about the parking slide.
Yeah, well, that's okay.
The numbers, are those cost to build or cost to buy?
Cost to build,
Okay.
and these numbers are from 2021, so they might not mean very much today due to inflation.
Next question is, of the added ADUs, how many are actually being rented out as opposed to, like, I'm just building this on my Portola Valley property and for my visiting family?
That is a great question. So it is It is not anywhere close to 100%. It's like maybe 50 to 60%. The Turner Center at UC Berkeley has done a lot of coverage and analysis and research on ADUs and SB9, and they had some stats on that that I kind of glossed over. So yeah, but it's not what you hope for. I would say that is a shortcoming of this for sure. State housing and community development kind of tags where these projects happen. So I was able to put this on a map. Kind of I think maybe some of what Ann's referencing here. This definitely is more of an affluent neighborhood phenomenon, right? So most of the activity in the last 5 years has been in West Petaluma, to a lesser extent in Midtown, and a scattering in East Petaluma. 162 new units were built, and we'll look at some projects in a few minutes here.
Question?
Yeah.
When you say ADUs, are these going to be separate buildings or extra rooms or dwellings?
Yeah, good question. So ADUs can be attached or detached, and the rules and permitting pathways and sizes and things, setbacks are all pretty much the same for detached and attached.
So most of these, especially on that west side, they may not be additional housing, but rather they're large houses broken up into separate little apartments.
I don't think that's actually that common. I could be wrong, and there's probably people in this room that know more about this than I do, but I think there's probably 3 really common types that I have seen around town. One is kind of a cottage, detached cottage, and then almost a lot of the other ones are essentially an ADU over either an attached garage or a separately constructed building with a garage with an ADU on top of it. Obviously, the attached ones would be less visible to see, but the ones that I'm familiar with are almost all detached and one of those 2 types.
Am I seeing that correctly from this distance? I see only one north of Washington on the east side. All of them are south of Washington?
Yep.
Thank you.
That's what it looks like to me too.
Okay. The Petaluma data, did that come out of the state RENA report, or did it come out of building permits directly?
This is from the State Housing and Community Development Department, has a searchable index of projects, essentially. So you can look up houses, 5-unit buildings, ADUs, that sort of thing. So there may be some questions about the accuracy of this data, but it maps to all the projects that I know about were in the database.
Chris, are these developments that you're mapping here, are they title owners that are developing on their property, or are these third parties coming in with capital to develop an ADU on someone else's title?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would guess, and this is a total guess, I think that probably and this is like informed by talking to contractors and architects, I would guess roughly in Petaluma, it's probably like, some majority are homeowner-driven projects, and then a minority are investor-owned projects. And currently ADUs and SB9, ADUs cannot be separately conveyed, so you couldn't create an ADU on somebody else's lot and then sell it or something like that. That's probably going to come in the next few years. SB9 projects can be separately conveyed, so you can create like a 2-unit condominium type arrangement with an SB9 project.
The data shows when these were delivered. Do you have any data for how long it took for the delivery of these units?
I don't. I think you can analyze that because at least the state data has, you can look at a given year which permits were billed and then when they were completed, but I didn't go down that path. My impression generally is that these projects happen pretty quickly. Having watched a lot of them being built around town, it seems like usually they are permitted to fully constructed within a year.
The SB9 you were talking about, R1 and R2, is that specific to Petaluma? Because every jurisdiction has the little side of different zoning.
Yeah, good question. So SB9 says it is only applicable on zones that only allow single-family housing. In Petaluma, that's R1 and R2. When you get to R3, in theory, you can build multiple units on a large enough R3 property. So this is
And Petaluma's going to have minimal lot sizes that are going to be acceptable for them, or is it just any R1, R2 lot?
Yeah, so SB9, essentially, the state is overruling minimum lot sizes is one of the kind of ways that they're sort of clearing the pathway for these projects. And so I believe in SB9 you can create a lot that's as small as, I don't know, either 1,200 square feet or 2,000 square feet, which is a very, very small lot, right? So basically you could take almost any lot in the R1, R2 districts and split it in half, and that would, the city would not be able to object to that. Any other questions, or should we keep going? All right, let's go next. Okay, so some of my observations about this are that, before we had ADU in SB9, Petaluma has this obscure kind of thing in the zoning ordinance called a dwelling group, which you can use, but it doesn't really address a lot of the limitations around ministerial approval or the setbacks issues or that sort of thing. So it barely ever has been used, in my understanding. Or you could pursue minor subdivisions, and in a minor subdivision, the city can extract a lot from a property owner or developer in terms of right-of-way dedications and other kind of public improvements or that sort of thing. And so this has opened up a lot. I would say that to me, the main ones here really are around setbacks, impact fees, approval timelines, and the fact that you're not using up density to deliver these units. I believe these are feasible on most residential parcels in Petaluma. I think there's also an interesting interplay between these rules and some of the other things that are going on, right? So better economics for minor subdivisions. So subdivisions, because of all the infrastructure you have to install and effectively bringing lots of stuff up to snuff in terms of streets and curbs and electric and water meters and all of that, are hard to pencil when they're small. And so you tend to see developers chasing these really big subdivisions. They're trying to maximize the number of lots so that they can amortize those costs over as many lots as possible. So minor subdivisions can be tricky, but in this case, 4-unit subdivision, instead of delivering 4 houses, can deliver up to 12 houses. Or if you can turn some of those into dwelling groups or get bonus density, you could do potentially better than that. So that's an exciting kind of interplay, I would say, between these things. I think density bonus starts to really make sense when you get above kind of 10 to 12 units. And so if you dedicate one of those units to affordable housing, then you can either get concessions on development or you can get additional units into the mix, which is also an interesting piece. My view is that these projects are adding density into affluent areas and are not really probably a major driver of displacement. That may be a controversial statement, it's just an observation. To me, the benefits of this, I think in particular, I'm excited about are intergenerational housing, the ability to deliver a mix of units. So when ADU started, it was really restricted to kind of 500, 600 square foot units, which is great for a single individual. Now they can get to 1,000 units, so realistically you can have a small family living in one of them. SB9 potentially could be even bigger than that. And I think from an urban planning perspective, these things have a very limited impact on infrastructure. It will be interesting to see as we move towards appliance electrification, heat pumps and stuff, how that works. But of all the infrastructure, electric is probably easier than wastewater and things like that. Yep.
What's ministerial approval?
Ministerial approval basically means the city has to approve all valid applications as opposed to a discretionary process where people can say, oh, I don't like your siding choice, or this building's too tall, or those types of more subjective issues. And so that is a key piece of streamlining the cost of permitting these things. Okay, why don't we go to the next slide? Okay, so I think we've covered some of this stuff, and we'll kind of get into some neighborhood stuff. And I'm being a little bit simplistic, west side, midtown, and east side, and that might be a little coarse for some people here. But I think a lot of this stuff's happening on west side and midtown. I think from the homeowner perspective, homeowners that probably are better capitalized and can kind of pursue these projects might have more home equity to tap into. I think for investors, those are better locations because there's a better return in terms of rents, and you also have suitable lot configurations relative to the east side, I would say. And one of the really big ones here is that in west side and midtown, the historic development pattern was that the garage was in the back, and so you have a driveway or egress that goes into the back of the lot, which is huge because then you can build something that is like really separated to some degree from the front unit and create that sort of privacy. On the east side, you don't have vehicle access to the lot. Like most of these older east side neighborhoods have 4-foot or 3-foot setbacks on either side, and so there's some construction logistics obviously involved in that you can overcome. But I think for a lot of people, the idea of like having somebody walking back and forth, you know, alongside your bathroom or something is maybe just a little bit less appealing. You also have a lot of irregular lot shapes, a lot of these wedge-shaped lots or cul-de-sacs or, you know, things with the backyards full of swimming pool or something that just make it a little bit more difficult. But I think there's still some opportunities on the east side. Let's go to some pictures here. Okay, so this is just sort of an illustration of what I see. And I kind of picked these, so this is, and this was sort of happenstance just because I'm familiar with these neighborhoods. So this is right near high school tennis courts, a couple blocks away. Sheldon Street here is a 1-block street that has 3 ADUs built on in the last 5 years. Middle one here is Edith Street. That 300 block of Edith Street is the densest, newest area of these projects in the whole city. And then this area of kind of older east side neighborhood, there's no projects whatsoever on that map. But you can kind of see the patterns of lot sizes here and kind of what, you know, what I was just speaking about. Alley access is prominent in some of these neighborhoods. It's certainly helpful to these projects. Midtown is interesting because there's a lot of extremely deep lots that are not uncommon to find lots that are 150 to 170 feet deep. So on those lots, you really could do not only an ADU, but you could also build a second house on that. Unfortunately, a lot of those parcels are zoned R3, so SB9 does not apply to those parcels, but dwelling group could. Let's see, some of the lots in Midtown are so narrow that there's some logistical challenge. Just getting into them, like I own a property that's 43 feet wide, and we're trying to figure out how to have a good driveway in the backyard. Why don't we go to the next slide? Just to jump into a little bit of really simplified economics here of these projects. My view is that these projects represent a better return on capital than building a new house on a lot. And I think that's probably not true of people that are building like Quarry Heights or something like that, but for small-time developers, these projects can really enhance the economic viability of investing in and rehabilitating single-family residential lots in Petaluma. You know, so rents on these things might be anywhere from $1,000 to $2,400. We're seeing more and more that garages are being rented separately. There's actually some legislation right now that is going to mandate that landlords rent garages separately to sort of illuminate the cost of parking or make it more affordable for people that don't want parking. Construction costs, labor's gone up a lot. Building materials have come down recently after a big spike during COVID. So still sort of running 300 to 500 depending on how turnkey you want it to be, that sort of a thing. I did not talk about it in this presentation, but there's a whole host of companies that are doing modular and prefab ADUs. Some of them will even come with a crane and just drop it in your backyard and be done with it. Those companies represent a pretty affordable option. There's, you know, starting at $80,000 up to maybe $250,000 for a full-size ADU. So in some ways, a lot cheaper than doing custom stick-built construction. Until recently, there was a great play where you could buy a property, build an ADU, refinance it, and pretty much get all your money back from that development project, and then have a nice kind of annuity stream. And then I'll just say on lending, just one thing to note here is that 1 to 4 unit residential properties basically are considered residential loans. They're getting kind of homeowner treatment in terms of rates, very high loan to value, 30-year fixed rate mortgages. You don't get any of that stuff if you're building a 20-unit apartment building. You're getting higher interest rates, shorter term, higher down payment, all that kind of stuff. So that's an attractive little goodie here. Some of the drivers of project costs, fire sprinklers. Sprinklers are not required in some projects, but are increasingly required in projects. And the city really wants to see as many new unit sprinklers. So there's tight rules around that. Sprinklers then trigger new water meters, which then trigger tearing up pavement and encroachment permits, and that can be a pretty meaningful cost. Sewer lateral upgrades, and then finally impact fees. We'll talk about that here real quick. Go to the next slide.
But on water and sewer,
yeah,
you pay for the construction, but you don't pay any connection increase, or you don't have to pay fee
water, yeah, it's a good question. I mean, the sewer, no, and water meters in Petaluma are really cheap relative to a lot of other jurisdictions. So the actual cost of the water meter, 1-inch water meter is like $460 or something. But installing it might cost, $25,000 to $30,000. So yeah. Impact fees. So this is just a quick kind of summary of how meaningful these can be. So there's a huge fee break on small ADUs. Basically, you don't have to pay any impact fees. You're just paying for Water meter, I think I got that number wrong on there, apologize. And then the school impact fees. Your impact fees can be as low as $10 a square foot. SB9 doesn't have any relief on impact fees yet, and so those could be pretty meaningful dimensions of the total cost of the project. Let's go to the next one.
And Chris,
Yep.
can I just clarify?
Yeah.
On the previous slide, when you're talking about construction costs.
Yeah.
The way I think about construction costs is building construction costs, not including the soft costs or
Yeah.
infrastructure costs.
Yeah. That would be a more standard way of.
So these kind of fees would be in addition to that.
Those are in addition to.
$3,500.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a big number, a big markup, right? For sure. And so the relief around that is a really meaningful thing. And you know, I think it's legitimate given the relative lack of impact that these things have on the city services. That may be a controversial statement. So a couple other comments, I guess I'd say. You know, I think maybe I'll just kind of say that I think a lot of people that are building these for investment purposes really are trying to skew towards higher end finishes, higher end tenants, higher end locations. Just because the return on cost, the kind of tenant mix, the O&M of those properties tends to be better. So I think that's kind of a driver of where investor activity is taking place. A lot of these projects, interestingly, will be built where the ADU is a lot higher end than the existing home on the property. So particularly when you drive around in Midtown, you'll see these kind of pretty small, like 800 square feet, 2-bed, 1-bath houses that maybe have a fresh coat of paint, but are kind of you know, not really that upgraded, and then some bright, shiny, new, very, you know, Dwell magazine worthy thing sitting behind it, which is interesting. My approach is sort of like to generally seek to expand the existing house. I think we have a lot of this, like 800,000 square foot, 2-bed, 1-bath stock in this town, and we could use more 3- and 4-bedroom houses, or at least I see a lot of demand for that kind of thing. And then I'd say, you know, my take is that building garages is great. Almost probably 70–80% of ADUs in town are a garage with a unit above it. I own about 10 of these. I have never seen a tenant park a car in the garage. They're entirely used for storage, and people are very willing to pay $200 to $300 a month for that. Building garages are pretty cheap too, because there's no plumbing, there's no kitchens or anything like that. I think this whole strategy of buying these things and then refinancing them is obviously very challenging at current interest rates. That will change. And then the final point maybe is a subtle one, which is that you're kind of straddling this line between like these properties are valued as homes versus these properties are valued as apartment buildings, right? And so like just if you could give an example, there are properties in West Petaluma that are a house and an ADU that might, you know, Zillow might say is worth like $1.2 million or $1.1 million, but you could go to Midtown and see a 4-unit property that is going to sell for 8 or 9 or maybe $1 million, because the people that are buying those properties are much more focused on valuing it around its cash flow versus this is my warm and cozy home and it happens to have an ADU behind it. And so I do think that this is an issue that is going to make developers pause about pushing too much density on these properties, because you're flipping from this is valued as a home to this is valued as a financial asset. And I don't know if that makes sense to folks, but that's something that I kind of see as a challenge to adding more density to these projects beyond kind of 2 or 3 units. Okay.
Chris, could you explain that line item that said build ADUs first?
Oh, yeah, I mean, my approach has been, you know, like I'm going to show a project that I'm working on in Bodega that is, we're going to do an ADU and an SB9, and just the impact fees kind of merit building an ADU first, in my perspective, yeah. Okay, so this is a project, this is a property right next door to one that I own, that I was outbid on. But this is a great example of, okay, this house in the front was kind of dumpy. The guy fixed it up a little bit, but then built this like very modern looking ADU behind it. This is a very common typology, and I'll just note, not only as a garage, but you'll see a lot of ADUs in town that have these very flat roofs. And the reality is that ADU height limits are a problem, an architectural problem. They might be a practical problem, but I think they're an architectural problem. So this guy's trying to max out 2 full 8-foot floors in a building that has a max height of 16 feet. Okay, so And you do that because the midpoint is the 16 foot. So it's still a weird look, but this is a very common thing. I'll show you the project I did. It has a hip roof that's very similar to that. That would be a nice thing to evolve on if possible. And so yeah, this is a great project. This is something that I could see kind of happening on almost every lot on this 200 block of Payram Street, because every lot is super deep and has room and egress and all of that to do these kinds of things. And this project was built by a contractor. I think that building was finished in like three months or something. Very cool to see. Let's go to the next one.
Can I ask a question about?
Oh yeah, sorry.
The roof thing?
Yeah.
So like, just to make it extreme, like an A-frame that's 40 feet tall, the midpoint is 20, like.
I will defer to somebody more experienced on that, but my understanding is that that's how it's calculated.
Yes,
All right.
Yeah.
pretty much.
Okay, this is a house I did over on English Street across from the high school tennis courts. This is a cool one. So corner lots are great places to do these projects. You can have one house facing one way and the other house facing the other way, and it's totally separate residential experience. You can see we have really high lot coverage. Like this would never be doable under kind of normal building code. So that's, from a density perspective, something I like. We try to mitigate the fact that the ADU has no outdoor space by putting a deck on it, which is frequently used. You can also see it's got this very low roof pitch on it as well. Okay, let's look at one more. So this is the one I'm currently working on. So this is on Bodega Avenue. And it's very typical of in Midtown and on the west side. There are a lot of lots that are just really kind of oversized, and I know you said in your recent email, underutilized parcel is a bad word, but I'm going to use it here. So this is an almost 14,000 square foot parcel, so it's about a third of an acre that had this one house on it. And so my plan with this property is basically we're going to do a gut and remodel of this house. We're going to turn it from a 2-bedroom, 1-bath to a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, which we think there's more market demand for. And then we're going to build a 1,000 square foot ADU over a 4-car garage, which again is probably mostly going to be used for storage space. And then we're going to build an SB9 house in the back corner here that's going to be 2 stories, and then a garage and kind of workshop area. And
So here you don't have to do a lot split because you just have 3 units.
That's correct. Yeah, so we have 3 units here. This property, the reason that this was not subdivided is that it's 7 feet too short on width in this R2 zone. The property would have to be 50 feet wide to do a regular subdivision. So you could do some funky like flag lot thing, which I hate. So we're just doing this. This is not an owner occupied thing. SB9 lot splits require owner occupancy currently.
So where will the new lot line be?
We're not splitting this. This is
Oh,
going
you're
to
not
be made
splitting
one
Oh, okay.
parcel. Yeah.
Okay.
Why do you need flag lots?
Funky egress for the back, lack of turnaround for a car,
Fire truck.
Fire issues. I think from a neighborhood perspective, it's weird, just from a walk circulation kind of thing. So purely aesthetic.
This one does it have a driveway problem?
This one also has a driveway problem, but it's not the one I was referring to. Yeah, so this has an 11-foot driveway. We're hoping to build a wider driveway so we have kind of a loop coming out of it. We'll see if the public works goes for that.
Yeah, so my property, if I want to do something, the biggest cost are going to be the water, electricity, sewer line, like, but I'm living in an RV, I go, okay, checked out off-grid.
Yeah.
So it's possible to do compostable toilets, you can put in a tank a little high, so it's a private little water tank that I can just hose water into. I could do it completely off-grid type thing. Do you see that as a possibility?
That is outside of my expertise. I lived in a tent for 2 years in my 20s, but I will say that I would see the code enforcement people freaking out about that, but.
Because we do gray water, we can do a shower, and sink, we do the gray water in the backyard, we do compostable toilet, so there's no wastewater. Electricity, we could actually put on solar panels with a battery pack on the backside of the solar panels, so the electricity taker, just put a water tank above, so there's water coming in. It'll be refill once a week with a hose, completely off grid.
Yeah, I mean, sounds cool to me. I have a hard time imagining the city going for that, but there are probably 10 people in this room that know more about that.
Yeah, because I think trying to get something at my place, hooked in, because the electrical, the panel is completely use that.
Yeah.
The water is kind of hard to do, the sewer line would be hard, everything's hard to do.
Yeah.
But that's the only way I can actually do it.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, any comments on that?
You're talking to it with permits?
What I mean? It's basically a shed, so I don't think I'm making a permit.
Yeah, there you go, exactly.
You need a permit.
I mean, half of Mendocino County is what you're talking
My
about.
son's living less, so he's lived in tiny homes. So my son's quite willing to, I've talked my son into building it and living it.
And I will, maybe just one thing I will say about this is that at this moment in time is really cool around the IRA credits around electrification, right? So as you're kind of going through all this stuff and panel upgrade, like you get 50% tax credit for doing that now, so there's some cool benefits and subsidies that are going on that can help with this sort of style of development.
So I may have missed the beat on the definition of SB 9, but I thought you said this wasn't going to be split, but then it's an SB 9, you're adding an SB 9 house.
So SB 9 has two separate things going on. One is lot split, and then the other is the ability to build a second primary residence on any single family zoned property, or you can do both of those things in combination and end up with 4 houses on what was once a single family lot.
Okay, I missed.
No, that's okay. So in this case, we're just doing the house.
Okay.
So I see a lot split going on currently, so it's pre-SB 9 if you're doing it currently?
We are not doing a lot split.
No, not you, but in this hypothetical project I'm looking at.
Oh, okay.
They are submitted for a lot split. So if they're submitted today, they're not under SB 9 yet for a lot split, right?
No, SB 9 is in effect.
It's in effect. But when they did the lot split, the fire department said we need truck access to the back, including turnaround.
Yep.
Can they still, that's still a thing?
Yeah, so in SB 9, the city can deny an SB 9 application around health and life safety issues. So I'm not surprised that that's happening, and that's something that you could not do with an ADU project.
And you have to meet single family parking requirements for the back end?
You do not. So parking is reduced in SB 9 to 1 parking space. And if you're next a half-mile radius of a high volume transit center, you have no parking.
You're just doing it because you think it's going to be more marketable?
Yeah.
Because you have
I mean, it's a huge lot, so there's like rules of places to park cars. So.
But you got a lot of asphalt on.
We're going to do gravel, I think, or pavers, but yeah. Okay, why don't we move on? I know I'm taking a lot of time here. Okay, so some of the challenges and limitations, I think I've hit on most of these. I think SB 9 needs to grow up. There's already a rule, kind of a cleanup rule on this. I think the things I'd like to see are kind of impact fees, applicability in all residential zones, not just single family zones, reducing or waiving the owner occupancy requirement for the lot splits. And then there's some ambiguity around what conditions the city can impose on the dwellings. It's sort of like a guarantee that you can build up to an 800 square feet, but beyond that, all bets are off. So that would be nice to expand, because the 800 square foot house is good, but like all of these laws are really encouraging building of a lot of sub 800 square foot houses, which again is good, but it's one of many unit mixes we need. My impression was that Petaluma was not seeking to restrict these, so if there is going to be local implementing ordinances, I hope it is as liberal as possible.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
You live in a historic district. Is the state law say by no historic district?
That is correct. That is correct.
Could Petaluma say, well, go ahead and build?
No. But I would suspect that that's the type of thing that will be
change
relaxed over time. Yeah.
Could you repeat that?
So the SB 9 says, the SB 9 statute at the state level says it is not applicable in historic districts, hazard zones, environmentally sensitive zones, things like that. So the city cannot say, oh, it's cool if you do it in historic districts, because they can't modify the state statute is.
Does the ADU law have historic district constraints?
The ADU law says city must allow ADUs in a historic district, but it can impose objective design criteria, which the city of Petaluma has done. So you can build an ADU in a historic district. It doesn't go through a design review process, but you can put like vinyl siding on it.
But there'd be nothing to prevent Petaluma from saying, we're gonna take SB 9 a step further, and here in Petaluma, we're gonna allow an SB 9 like process.
Totally, that's
in a historic district.
That is a great idea for the next slide. Yeah, yeah, exactly. On the ADU, maybe just one more thing, on the ADU side, I think some of the things that would help, greater height limits, the city's height limit is actually 2 feet lower than the state height limit, so that would be a great reform. And then this idea of like being able to separately convey or sell them would be a huge benefit to housing affordability, in my opinion. And then there's a separate thing called junior ADU, which is a sub 500 square foot ADU, but you can only build those on owner occupied properties today. So those things are maybe final roadblocks that could be relaxed if there was mandate for them. Last slide, maybe I'll kind of use this to tee up more discussion on this. Has been great so far. These are the things that in my mind would accelerate the use of these. More developers, more capital, lower interest rates, probably honestly the biggest ones. I think kind of the ongoing reform and cleanup of SB9.
More contractors.
More contractors, yeah, exactly. Cheaper 2x4s, more contractors. We have this dwelling group code in the statute, which is clunky and barely used. We could, to your point, conform it more to SB9. For example, you could say if you want to apply for a dwelling group, we're going to throw out rear yard setbacks or something like that, or we're going to relax these fire egress, issues, that kind of a thing. So, like, because right now, Midtown, a lot of West Side is off limits for SB9 because it's in the R3, in some cases R4 zoning districts. The city could unilaterally adopt more favorable ADU rules if it wanted to. The state allows ADUs up to 1,200 square feet. City statute is only 1,000 square feet, so that's a disconnect. And then this height issue that I've been harping on. I'm probably going to piss a couple people off by saying that I think really we have to be cautious about a tree ordinance that impacts trees that are not street trees or trees that are not in front yard setbacks. If we are protecting some 40-foot tall acacia tree that's in the middle of some backyard because it grew up there, that's going to be a huge problem for rollout of more of these projects. So I'm just going to plant my flag on that. I'm a tree guy, but like that's maybe something that we have to think about. On the balanced climate kind of analysis suggests that density is probably more important than individual urban trees, but again, you can kick me after this if you disagree. And then finally, I think the last three really are. Two of the last three here really are about like, what can we learn from the fact that this has quietly become 20% of our new housing in California and nobody's pissed off about it. That's a pretty big accomplishment, right? And so we can take that lesson of doing these unobtrusive, gentle density projects and bring them into our GPU process and say, for example, we can expand density in residential zones. We can introduce by right multifamily projects. So like, Berkeley right now is considering implementing an ordinance, basically says on any residential property you can build up to a 4-plex in certain cases or up to an 8-plex in certain cases. Like they can do that in their general plan. There's SB 10, well, another Scott Gaynor law that was passed a couple years ago that allows cities to do that without going through lots of sequence gyrations. And so that's something that we could do here that would kind of just open the lid on this stuff a little bit more, but not really fundamentally change the character of our neighborhoods too much. And yeah, that's just something, we can take lessons from this and go further than this if we want to. So I'll just leave on that and would open it up for discussion, comments, and reactions.
Yeah. I see the good and the bad of this. I really love that, there's intentional lower cost rental properties within the built environment. That's a good way. But as we live in a town that wants to live and die on tourism, the ADUs are the ideal Airbnb, VRBO market. So really only half of them are helping our housing problem, if we even know what they are. But if you put the ADU into the rental, into the VRBO market, you've elevated the value of the land, you've caused house bidding, all the real estate in town goes up, and really it doesn't help the people. So what's your thoughts on that?
So my understanding is that for both ADU and SB9, the state has said that you can restrict sub 30-day rentals for those units, and in fact, the city of Petaluma ordinance says that no ADU that's been permitted after some date in 2017 can be rented for under 30 days. So I feel like that's a pretty solid way of mitigating what you're describing, but people do stuff, I mean, like, you know, is it, and I mean, there certainly are other cities that have a very hardcore approach to this, and go to Airbnb and VRBO and demand names, addresses, and then, you know, regulate those property owners, so more muscular regulatory approach. Okay, yeah, so I don't know anything about short-term rentals, so, but I know at least on statute, it's not permitted on new ADUs.
A lot of the ones that are going now are look like above a garage or a backyard.
Yep.
And you have some sort of setback in there, we don't get that, but is it possible, because a lot of properties, houses, especially older properties,
Yeah.
houses are in the back, and all the front yard is large. Do you see front yards being used at all?
Yeah, so in the Petaluma statute, you're not allowed to build, and I might get this wrong, but either you can't build it in front of the main house or you can't build it in the front yard setback. And so there is some wrinkle around that. And the SB9 does not include that, but I think there is some limitation in the city code about building them in front of.
Could we add that in with SB9 coming? Could we add that in so that the front of the street view?
Seems appropriate to me, yeah.
I think there's already I think the new law actually accepts front yards.
Oh, okay.
If you're under 800 square feet. 16 feet
Okay.
tall.
Yeah.
Now the front yard goes out the window.
Interesting, yeah, good.
So where is grant money to build?
Good question. So I am doing research for this presentation, came across the fact that the budget last year had a 40 or 50 million, the state budget, a $40-50 million grant program. They were giving people $40,000 per unit to build these things, which pisses me off that I didn't know about that. I think I would guess that money came in when, I mean, $50 million at $40,000 pop, not really that many of these things.
That was mostly for just doing the permitting and.
Oh, interesting, yeah.
So.
Yeah, I mean, that would be nice. I know I can't comment on where that might come from. It seems like the state government's on the downstroke in terms of austerity. But yeah, that would, I think, I mean, substantively reducing the impact fee is almost like similar, right? You don't have to compete for it.
But still building it is $100,000.
Yeah. Yeah, and my understanding is that some of these companies that are doing these modular things are offering financing for them, and so in theory, if you want it as a rental asset, you can build it, finance it, and repay it with the cash flows from renting it. But, yeah.
So I think we've come a really long way. I mean, in Petaluma, just 6 years ago before the state got involved, maybe 1 or 2 ADUs.
Totally, yeah.
And at the time, they were actually charging full impact fees for ADU, same as a house. At the time it was like $50,000.
Yeah.
It was crazy. So I was in front of council back then and I said, you need to reduce the actual impact fees. You want to get ADUs built. But at the time, nobody really did, right? Jurisdictions didn't want them.
Yeah.
Because they were nothing but headaches for planners. Because they were discretionary, which meant public hearing, which meant neighbors from backyard fences were all there. I mean, there's classic stories about ADUs on B Street, where neighbors still don't talk to each other. So the state, I think it's great. What the state has done, I think it needs to settle for a while. I think this idea of, I think Petaluma was smart and limited it to 1,000 square feet. Because at the end of the day, it's not an ADU anymore, right? What you're getting rid of is single family zoning. If you're allowing 1,200 square foot houses, that's actually bigger than most of the houses.
Totally, yep.
To add height, Petaluma's height is actually pretty reasonable. It's 21 feet to the midpoint, which is actually taller than most of the main houses, right? So I think we need to kind of take a break and see how many ADUs get built. I don't think we need more incentives for people to do ADUs. Maybe you would enjoy them as a developer. But I live in an old historic district, and I'm just waiting to see, I design them and I've seen them pop up on our streets. It's going to affect parking. People don't understand it yet, but when there's 10 ADUs going on a block and people don't have to provide parking, people are parking on this.
Absolutely.
So they're definitely going to transform the single family neighborhoods, which I don't have a problem with, but I don't think we need to accelerate that anymore. I think we should let this run out for 10 years and just see where we end up.
Makes sense?
Yeah, I would make one comment, and that is from the environmental point of view. That I look on the east side, and the southeast side was primarily two-car suburbia, just the essence of two-car suburbia right out of the 70s, 80s. And when you allow them to double the number of houses there without any public transit, you're basically saying we're going to have four-car suburbia. And that's what all those houses on the southeast side, 15%, 20% of our housing potentially is four-car suburbia. How does that improve our environment in terms of carbon use? It's just on the east side. If they said on the west side, downtown, beautiful. Build as much as you can. Look, what if we built near the railroad station downtown? What if we built near the railroad station on the north side? Within that 1 mile or half-mile radius? Nothing. And so I look at this, the opportunity around the rail station has been completely neglected by the state, and the southeast portion of our city is exactly the target area for doing just the wrong thing.
Interesting. Yeah, go.
Oh, I was just gonna say, or you enable neighborhood retail on the southeast side so that you don't have people getting in their cars. I mean, there are ways to mitigate the problem, you know, without.
Yeah, I would love to see a retail center on the extra 10 acres that Casa Grande owns. As soon as possible.
Well, you add corner stores. You know, there are things that you can do if you're densifying a neighborhood, gentle density, I love that term, that you can improve it with by making it truly a 15-minute neighborhood.
And I'd also say that I think part of it, a lot of the carbon impact is the choice. Can somebody live in Marin and Sonoma versus are they living in Tracy, you know, or in Fairfield, or, you know, somewhere like that, and driving into Marin, you know, and I think that is pretty meaningful. I do think that what you're referring to about car, you know, auto-centric South, you know, East Petaluma is correct, but I think if you don't add the density, you're never going to get to that future desired condition. And I do think, I mean, having lived in Southeast Petaluma, I will say that, like, a lot of those very wide, quiet streets are extremely bike friendly. And like, there is I at least can kind of see in my head, like, a pathway where that could become a more sustainable neighborhood. Yeah, sorry.
Sorry, I'm raising my hand for a while.
Yeah,
just want to jump in while I can. I just wanted to say I work for the state, and I work in some of this policy, which is why I just wanted to share. The state was offering about 40 grand a piece for grants previously. They've had to wrap up that budget item because we're heading into a 3-year recession. So a lot of extra funding has been removed to this sort of thing, as much as folks would have liked to have kept it. One thing I wanted to flag, though, is for a while the state was offering funding from municipalities. I wanted to look into doing deed-restricted investments in ADUs so that you could have ADUs that actually met the affordable housing target. They helped people kind of get their units online, and there was a state fund for that. And it's still, I argue, a good idea for some municipalities that can afford it, at least to look at. Going just based on that one comment about density of cars, I would like to point out, the more people you have paying fees, paying taxes in an area, the more revenue we get for things like our enterprise fund, the more we can expand public transit, the more opportunity there is to also look at shuttles into some of these areas that don't get regular transit routes. So it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can do both. We shouldn't restrict that opportunity. And also, one comment on we have enough incentives to build. I know a lot of people in my boat right now that are either looking to build an ADU on their unit for their parents, or are living with they and their spouse are living with their family, and their family's looking to build an ADU for them because of how expensive it is. In both cases, I've rarely run into anybody who's actually able to afford it, even with reduction in fees, and that's partially because some of these homes are so old, you've already taken equity out. So I do think there's a lot of room, given the affordability crisis we have, to build more of these units, especially in these communities where we can have density without it looking hideous, especially because the ADUs, like you said, are so far back.
A question about loan products, kind of going on with grants. I know Redwood was supposed to roll out kind of a HELOC loan product where they would take it, assuming you had the ADU, and then give you the funds based on that. Are there any good lenders or loan products you come across for this?
I don't, yeah, that's a little outside my expertise in terms of construction financing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's smart to say about that. Anyone, any other thoughts on that topic? Yeah, that's right.
A lot of people in the previous comments have been circling around parking, and I haven't heard anybody use the word bike. And I just want to say, and this may be very unpopular, but I don't think it's a bad idea to put more pressure on parking. Like, it might finally get people to get on their bikes and get the city to roll out, active transportation and transit. So, I mean, I think that could be a good thing.
I agree with you, yes.
Bike boulevard.
A little bit different than the debt question. Is there an equity fund that you're familiar with for third-party capital to be working with developers to help improve the existence of these, what seems to be a great infill opportunity?
That is a really interesting question, and I didn't want to propose that as an idea here because of competition, but I'm surprised that doesn't exist. I think it doesn't exist because the deals are so small, right? And everybody in finance wants to do like bigger and bigger and bigger deals. But I think it would be a very appealing local investment product. Like, we care about our town, we want to do these, want to do them the right way. Let's raise $10, $20 million and go do these projects. That could be a really intriguing idea. That could be something that's sponsored by a nonprofit. It could be sponsored by a municipal government. Like, there's interesting ideas around that. I am genuinely surprised that there isn't some behemoth group that's kind of latched onto this, because you are seeing huge private equity companies gobble up, massive amounts of single-family housing, but they're not. This is maybe too operationally intense. I'm not really sure why this is not caught on, because the returns, particularly when you're using relatively cheap debt, can be quite attractive.
Well, you begged the follow-up question is, what is equity yield right now on an ADU development?
I mean, my experience is sort of on an unlevered basis, sort of like 10 to 12%. Then you have depreciation, appreciation, other benefits along the way.
I'll ask right after you ask.
Actually, I just wanted to echo something that Blake said. If I understood you correctly, I don't think we need to slow down. I think we need to continue building affordable units, and if ADUs could fill some of that need, I think we need to move forward with that. In the last week, I've had 3 women in their 60s ask if I knew of an affordable place to live. So there are 3 women that don't have a place to live, and I'm finding them at garage sales, at events. I mean, it's a huge problem.
It is a huge problem.
It's a huge problem. And for those of us who have homes, it seems, we're a step removed or 2 steps removed, but it's a big problem.
Yeah, it is. It's a huge problem. I mean, just to riff on that a little bit, every time I rented a unit for under $2,000 per unit, or even $2,500, I usually get 60 to 70 applicants for that unit, and half of those people want to move 3 or 4 people into their 1 bedroom. And so the housing crisis is very, very tangible when you're confronted by that.
So,
mayor's prerogative.
One of the things I like about this is we're stuck in housing on a variety of bases. One of the bases is, if you've owned your house for 100 years, you really can't afford any place else you like that is the right price. So you age in place alone, usually as a single person, and it was a 3-4 bedroom house with 1 occupant. That's not good. So you put an ADU. My next door neighbor, case in point, and has 300 or 400 square foot ADU behind with 2 young people in it. They each have a car, so there's more cars in the street. But the main house only has 1 car, and it's in the garage. So, your point earlier about infrastructure impacts aren't that bad. It's a way to bring the infrastructure, the impact back to where it was when there was a bigger family in the big house. So it kind of is all, kind of all works itself.
And I gotta defend myself on this because
Love
I'm a little misunderstood. I am all for more and more units. That's not what I was saying. As an architect, I don't think that good design and more units are mutually exclusive. So a lot of the rules that the city is keeping in place, like the height limits, actually forces a little bit more sensitive design, rather than popping a 1,200 square foot ADU in the back, which is basically another single family house on the back. So it really is a discussion of, do we get rid of single family zoning, which is a discussion of everybody. I know people want to get on it. And do we just get rid of our single family neighborhoods, versus do we smartly and hopefully sensitively design ADUs that are subordinate to the main house? And then those things can be done well. So when I said not have any more incentives, I'm talking about, no, you don't need extra size, in my opinion, or extra height, because those have impacts on neighbors. I'm all for as many units as we can fit in there, but hopefully designed well.
And it is an interesting point you're making. I mean, a lot of the older neighborhoods, the dominant house form is this 800 to 1,000 square foot house, single story house, and then you're building this 2-story ADU next to it. And it is a weird, to me, it is a little weird. And in other cities, I mean, with like Berkeley, for example, we spent some time, there's just a much more common practice around lifting up houses and kind of building more density.
I mean, you saw that the first slide that you showed of the builder's ADU over the garage. I mean, all right, I wouldn't want that in my neighborhood.
Yes.
Maybe it's providing something for somebody, but it wouldn't fit in our local neighborhood.
I would agree with that.
I've given you a current knowledge, and I'm surprised to see 162 units actually in a short period of time having been built. That's pretty substantial. So with yourself and maybe some of your friends and also the construction trade that are going, oh, okay, opportunity. And with the number of I thought, oh, let me show you what I've done over here, would you want me to? And with rules now, is this possibly a start of a snowball effect? And where are we going? Put on a crystal ball, what type of volume could you imagine could happen here in the next 5 years if things really start rolling?
Yeah, really interesting question. My view on that is that interest rates are going to be a big headwind for more of this activity, given how much of it is financed. I think that's a big problem. Not that any of us in this room are going to do anything about that, but it is a fact of life. I do feel like it is becoming just kind of a more standard go-to for kind of house flipper type folks. One thing we did talk about that I would find interesting is like people typically building tract home type developments are not contemplating these, and it seems like it would make sense to. And I don't know, what the dynamics around that are. It's kind of outside my expertise. So I don't have a smart answer for you. I think that if I was to wager, I would say in the next 5 years, probably more of these will be built to some, not maybe on an order of magnitude more, but I could see several hundred more being built in the next 5 years, despite this headwind around interest rates. And part of that is the modular piece, part of it is there's just greater awareness of it. Part of it is that these things, in some senses, are an affordability tool for the primary homeowner, right? So if you have a big mortgage payment and you can put one of these things in and pay half your mortgage, that is an affordability mechanism for the property owner, right? So I think all of those things are kind of people are becoming more aware of those.
So 100 units per year over 5 years would be a reasonable estimate of what could happen?
That's a guess, yeah, but I think that's,
Just trying to
yeah, and I mean, the trend, if you look at the statewide trends or county level trends, basically these things are accelerating until about 2021, and then they kind of dropped off a little bit. So, it's not some exponential kind of thing, and then I think we're going to see, decent, trickle of these things that will add up over time to a meaningful amount of housing. I mean, like how many 162 unit individual projects in Petaluma have installed out for years and decades, right? And this has just happened relatively seamlessly, so I think that's
I have to go back and check the 162 units because following our housing reports to HCD, I don't recall quite that many. I think our number was closer to like 20 in each of the last couple of years. That average would be like 40. So I don't know where that's coming from. New developments have ADUs in them, and so maybe those are getting counted up in there too. But in what we submitted to the housing element, I think I only recall 28
Interesting.
are
Okay.
projected.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, so we, you know, and what the city projects to cover its state required needs is different what the market will drive, right?
Yeah.
You know, and so there are two different numbers out there, but do we feel like we've gotten 40 per year for the last 4 years? Doesn't that feel like a little high?
This is high.
Interesting.
But
I
it's
mean,
HCD data, so somebody.
Yeah, and I won't say that I like drove around and looked at every single one of them, but as I scrolled through the list, I recognized a lot of them, but, you know, I can't speak to them.
And I would like to see how many came to market
Yeah.
versus, across the street from St. Vincent's Grade School, there's a complete rebuild of an old Victorian, you go down to foundation coming out,
Yeah.
and there's a new garage, and on top of the new garage is a teeny tiny ADU. I'm thinking that's a guest house, not an ADU.
Right.
You know, I mean, I think that's a lot of what we see.
Yeah.
The over garage market is really guest house.
I mean, just to push back on that a little bit, I think if you're a rational homeowner and choice A is build an ADU and pay $25,000 in impact fees and a water hookup and the risk it might trigger fire sprinkler rules, or simply build that thing and call it a guest house and don't put a kitchen in it, I think most people would probably choose the latter, in my opinion. And I don't know if architects in the room can opine on that, but like that would just be such a cheaper option than.
Guest house would be cheaper?
Yeah, because there's no impact fees, it's just an extension of living space of the house.
But then you could.
20 for years, actually.
Oh, totally, yeah.
What's that comment?
Just a guest house as a fake workaround.
Yeah, you don't have a kitchen.
Yeah.
And then you permit it out, it gets all approved, and then you put it in a hot plate and you got it.
Yeah, exactly.
And that was when impact fees were crazy. They were $40,000, so nobody would do it, nobody rational. They would just do it on the slide.
Yeah.
And that was one of the arguments, like, you're missing the opportunity, because this is what people are really doing. You can actually get a little bit of fee out of them if you
Super interesting.
Does SB 9 and ADU have any provision for fully electrified units, or people are doing gas if they want in these?
No, because they're new units, so they have to be REACH code, fully electrified.
Fully electrified, no gas. Great.
And I just want to point out that what we're seeing now is everything that you've been describing is a relaxation in the planning rules that apply to ADUs.
Yes.
But in the realm of building department, ADUs are just seen as normal building. There's no relaxation on that.
That's correct.
And that's one of the big reasons why, to Blake's comment, construction is still really, really expensive. Because the city doesn't have the authority to relax any of the state building codes.
Totally, yes.
It's just the fire sprinkler. And that's huge, actually, that's a big.
Right.
But that's also a state thing.
Yeah, the state imposed that on jurisdictions because cities were using fire sprinklers as a way to actually stop.
Right.
Because they were so prohibited. So now, if the original house doesn't have fire sprinklers, the ADU does not have that.
No, really? Up to what size ADU though? Is that?
Any size.
It's a big deal.
You had mentioned, Chris, about the parking rules around SB9. Can you talk to that again?
Yeah, so SB9 requires one single parking space for the SB9 house. And if the SB9 house conforms with the zone's setback rules, the house can be as big as you want it to be. If the house cannot fit on the lot with setbacks or FAR or open space or whatever, it can only be 800 square feet. But in any case, regardless of what it says, it only has to have one parking space. If it's a half mile from a high-use transit thing, better word for that, like the train station or the bus station, then it does not have to have any parking.
Does that mean you count the existing house and what the existing house is required to have when, and you need to just show one brand new, or can you aggregate it and show the existing?
That's a good question. I don't think that the SB9 modifies the parking requirements of an existing house. I don't think.
So that's my question. It may not be answered today. But if there's a house that the primary existing house doesn't meet parking requirements, does SB9 require that it be Retrofit, no.
Yeah, so SB9 cannot force you to bring up to compliance in any way an existing structure. So if you have an existing structure that's like sitting in a setback, the city can't require you to do something about that. And with ADU, not only do you not need parking spaces, but you can cannibalize parking spaces and build ADU.
Yeah, it's a double whammy.
Yeah. To your,
Yeah, that's the point I was gonna raise, so that because ADU allows that, doesn't that sort of de facto answer Kevin's question about like, then you can aggregate requirement, and the requirement for the primary residence is effectively zero now?
well, he was asked about SB9.
Right, but I mean, so in an SB nine,
But
if you have to have one, that means the whole kit and caboodle only has to have one.
I don't think so. I think if the existing house needs to have two.
Yeah, but if it doesn't anymore because of ADU.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Right, you can turn the garage into an ADU, get rid of those parking
Yeah.
spaces.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you
Not
have-
have to have any for the
Yeah.
ADU, so now they're all out on the street.
Yeah.
So.
But the
that's where
SB9
it's huge.
would
The
need,
SB9 would have
would need to have
right.
one.
Yeah.
Just need to have
Yeah.
But all those for us conversions.
But I think it's, I mean, I do think it's important to remember, at least from an investor perspective, that parking is desirable, right? Like,
You
we're,
need storage.
right? And people are willing to pay for it, and it's cheap to construct, and like, and it improves, kind of tenant quality, I would say. So I just think, I don't know. On one hand, I'm sure people here are fighting parking, but also maybe we may have two minds about parking.
Well, so would you rather house more people or house
Yeah.
more cars?
Yeah.
Our cars are built better than our houses.
I have one silly definition thing for you. When you say west side, you mean downtown. When we look at anything west of Sunny Slope, you should call it east side compatible.
Oh,
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I would say like Cherry Valley does not really fit into my prototype of what I'm thinking about here. Yeah.
Downtown.
Very fair point.
Yeah, Old Town.
Cool, great conversation.
Yeah, just trying to get my head around some of maybe what the downside as a homeowner, I think, would obviously loss of privacy, right? So, my backyard, I'd be assigned a certain amount of value to, whatever, and now, that's going away, or changing a lot.
Absolutely, yeah, these things are cannibalizing people's backyard lawns.
To that point, a lot of zoning says you need to have private outside space on your, I don't know if you can, on your ADU or on your SB9 unit. Is there any private outside space?
I think you have to have at least 100 square feet for the ADU.
Yeah, it's 100 square feet,
Yeah.
which is tiny. Yeah, I'd say that is a downside, is privacy.
So if you're buying a property, let's say it's $1 million, and that's what that house is worth on the market, and that's with the big backyard. Now what you're doing is you're cannibalizing some of that. So the actual value to that main house is maybe it's now an $800,000 house. And you're building a $400,000 ADU, but somehow it all works out.
This is sort of one of the comments I was trying to make, which is that there is a trade-off between, like, you do get in really dense urban neighborhoods, like in West Berkeley, and I lived in West Berkeley, so I keep referring to it. Single-family houses are way more valuable than the fourplexes or the eightplex, and like those fourplexes and eightplexes might produce great rental income, but are valued cheaply because they're being bought by investors, whereas people are really prizing this nice, beautiful craftsman house and that kind of thing. So I do think you get to a tipping point where like the scarcity value of a single family home with a backyard makes it worth a lot. I don't think we're anywhere close to that in Petaluma, but like, I do think that's, to your point, a trade-off with these projects. And I worry, like with my 3-unit project, if I ever wanted to sell it, which I don't, the person who's gonna wanna buy that is somebody who wants rental income, not a homeowner. And so it's gonna be valued as a rental property, not a homeowner, cozy home kind of thing.
Yeah, but if it's your returns are fine the way they are, like holding on.
Yeah, that's my point.
On the question you're raising, a loss of privacy if you own a house, or if they put houses closer together, the possibility of getting a fire from your neighbor's house, or the loss of anticipated parking places on your street when you're having a party. All of those losses in value to somebody who owns it. Has any of that been taken to court either statewide or national?
Not that I'm aware of. Yeah, that's a really interesting question. In other cities, like in the East Bay, there's lots of fights over shading and shade studies and like impacts of that sort. And like, I've never heard of those dynamics coming into play in Petaluma. And I'd also note that to your point about the southeast Petaluma neighborhoods, like those houses are built 6 feet apart from each other, right? They have a 3-foot setback on each side. And so there's not really that much privacy in the incumbent layout of a lot of these neighborhoods.
If there's an existing structure with very limited setback, can you rebuild the same footprint, the new ADU? You have an outbuilding?
I don't think so.
Yes, you can.
You can, okay.
You just, if you add above it. it has to
Oh,
be
yeah, that's
one.
right, that's right, yeah.
So I just want to respond to what Bill was asking, and I think part of it depends on how big your lot is, how many people are living in your home. Like right now, you have a lot of people in your home, but in 10 years, you'll have fewer people. I also think we should think about the environmental impact of putting more houses in and more hardscaping and taking away, I know you're a tree guy, taking away trees, taking away permeable surfaces, and adding more hardscaping. Like, our backyard was 107 degrees. So we live a few blocks from here, 107 degrees. So, we live in a heat island, and I don't know that we want to be adding, more concrete and more hard materials into our downtown. I mean, like 6th Street, where Lisa Marie is how many degrees cooler than ours? 10 degrees?
Oh, 10, yeah.
With all the trees and all the greenery that you guys have. So, I mean, it's really something to think about, that there is an impact.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe we could wrap up soon. I'm loving this. Great discussion, but yeah, also see people filter out.
Get together and lobby your city government to make a more restrictive local ordinance. And under the green, all green, that's what a lot of the cities are doing in reaction to the paving. And because climate is one of the 3 areas where you can gather data. And that is a really good point you brought up.
Just a private question, I was talking about the money's in, money's out, and return on investment. So, just for illustration, you've got $1 million home. If I put so it cost me $100,000 for a tiny little house, in ADU on the side yard, whatever, maybe have my son live in it for a while and everything, and then say, okay, so we retire, he moves away, and we sell the house. So I've got $1 million house, I added in a $100,000 dwelling. Will I get return on the investment? Will I get 1.1 million out of it as a sale, or does it add value to the property, or does it actually detract from the sale value?
Yeah, I would say that there's not enough comps out there to really have a deep understanding of that. My gut tells me that if a nice subordinate ADU probably adds value from a residential real estate perspective, but once you start getting into 2, 3, 4 units, again, you're probably not, you're taking, especially if you're starting with something that was a owner-occupied home and turning it into an investment property, it probably will not necessarily recoup that value if you were to sell it quickly. If you hold on for 10 or 20 years, that's a different story. But my gut tells me that like a modest, well-planned, well-integrated ADU probably adds value, and you would probably recoup that. But there's very few data points on that because we've only been building these for the last 5 or 6, 7 years.
So I did just go through an appraisal appeal with the state, because ADUs were being valued close to their build cost in taxation, and they are not actually adding that much to the value of the home when it's sold. So you don't add an ADU and then sell the home thinking you're going to recoup all of this money, because that's not the way it works. So you'll get a little bit of it back, but really you're looking at the long-term return. That's where the benefit is, and also adding the housing stock. They're not out of the gate worth as much as they cost you to build.
Like a hot tub.
Right. I mean, the state and the county has recognized that in the comps that they've done for taxation purposes.
Are they surprised?
Yeah, but that's.
So they're not, they
Oh,
didn't
with the
reassess your property based on the full value,
They
the
did,
full cost?
they did, and I said, but I can't get that much out of it.
And
And
they
so they
knocked
went
it.
back and they looked at the comps and said, you're right, you don't get that much out of it,
Interesting.
so, yeah. I mean, it did increase the property value some, but it's not what it's meant on.
Are you cash flow positive?
I am.
But that may go to answer your question on why there's not an equity fund running around doing these things.
7%.
Yeah.
I don't think that's gonna change when there's more comps, because I think the
Yeah.
problem is that there isn't enough comps.
Yeah.
And that's the only way they can think.
Yeah, exactly.
Are we done?
Cool, yeah, this is awesome. Thank you.
Just to tell a quick story, up until 2 weeks ago, 2.5 weeks ago, I thought that Chris would partner with the SB9 attorney, and they each cover half the program. So, full marks to Chris for doubling the length of his program in the last 2 weeks. And clearly, I was wrong, he was very capable of turning the program by himself, so. We'll see you in 2 weeks on parking. Thanks for being here.
Good for fun. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Yeah.